Hi, how's everybody doing? I want to welcome everybody to today's panel on community land trust as part of day 2 of the Poverty Solutions Summit. My name is Ahmed Mori. I am the Vice President of Community Economic Development at Catalyst Miami, and I'm joined by Mandy Bartle and Jason Webb, which I will introduce in a quick second. Unfortunately, our moderator, Adrian Madriz, couldn't be here today, and so I'm filling in for him. And he was going to give a couple of details about an organization in Miami that is working currently on trying to develop a community land trust, which is SMASH. It's Struggle for Miami's Affordable and Sustainable Housing. I happen to sit on the board of that particular organization, and I know I won't go as in depth as he will, but I think part of what we knew that he was going to discuss was the organization does currently actually have a plot of land and a blueprint for a development that was approved through a democratic community governed process, as is the board that has already decided to govern the development as it moves forward. So it's a very exciting development. There's a lot of work that has been done, a lot of work that will be done, and getting through so many different technical elements of the development, but hopefully being part of a group of people such as Mandy Bartle, who is on this chat today with South Florida CLT, that is going to introduce this idea in different ways throughout the Miami-Dade County area, and even more excited by the fact that this is a completely community-owned and community-governed project. So with that said, I wanted to introduce our speakers today. First, I'll introduce Jason Webb. Jason is drawing on over 30 years of experience in community organizing and revitalization, specializing in housing in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Here, Jason oversees membership strategy and capacity building of startup groups. Jason, for the last 2 years, has also been co-chair of Grounded Solutions Network's Racial Equity and Inclusion Staff Committee. Before coming to Grounded Solutions, Jason worked for 15 years at Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative and network member Dudley Neighbors Inc., DNI, serving in several capacities, such as Director of Real Estate and Technology and Director of DNI, the Community Land Trust, and Director of Administration and Finance. Jason oversaw development of over 100 units in several community land trust developments and created a youth jobs program called Communityscapes. Jason currently resides in Central Florida with his wife and 3 children. And then, of course, we have Mandy Bartle. Mandy Bartle helped form South Florida CLT in 2006 and has been executive director since 2010. As a visionary 15 years ago, Mandy organized the region's first conference, needs assessment, and coalition to address affordable housing. The efforts led to the market's only regional CLT. A graduate of Carnegie Mellon University with a degree in architecture and urban studies, Mandy's recognized locally and nationally as a trusted expert and innovator in housing and community development. To date, Mandy's leadership at the helm of South Florida CLT has resulted in the creation of more than $15 million of new real estate investment. So here now, we're going to give our panelists a chance to speak, and we'll hear from them for about 10 to 12 minutes each, and then there'll be approximately 15 minutes reserved in the for a Q&A for folks in attendance at the end of the session. And please, as you hear things that Mandy and Jason are discussing, feel free to type your questions into the chat. So we'll begin with Jason here. So Jason, please, if you can, introduce us to the concept of community land trust and tell us a little bit about your experience helping build the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Boston, along with so many different community members that were involved in the project, since this is really one of the most inspirational CLTs in the country.
Thank you, and thank you for the invite to be here. A community land trust is a nonprofit organization that has an open membership and a very unique tripartite board of directors. And it's really set up to allow for the community to control those community assets. As what you said in terms of what SMASH is trying to do is really do what we would consider to be a classic community land trust structure. And that is make sure that the decision makers are the residents that actually live there. Some of my work that I've done in Boston and Roxbury with Dudley Street is basically in my own community. That's where I grew up, born and raised. And the community in which I grew up in was one of the devastated communities that happened through redlining and classic neighborhood disinvestment of the late 70s and early 80s, where half of our community was left vacant in terms of about 30 acres of vacant land. And this was only in a 60-acre, area. So I remember growing up, walking down the street, and literally the only thing I could see was vacant lots. The community from time to time would get our city to come in and try to do these planning initiatives, trying to say what's best for our community and sort of, try to get residents to buy into these things. At a number of these community meetings, towards the late 80s, the community started to say, you know what, we don't want to participate in any more of these, and we actually want to do our own. So the community organized and came together and created their own planning, process for the community to really take care of these vacant lots. One of our first initiatives was take a stand and own the land. And it was this ability of the community really coming up and saying to the city, also saying to the private owners of these vacant lots to either clean up or give us the land and we're going to put it to better productive use. So for a number of years, that's what we did. We actually worked very hard in partnership with the city because they finally came to the table and realized that there could be a political win-win if they support us, and started to work on creating this community land trust. And we were successful in going ahead and controlling those 30 acres, building over 250 units of permanent affordable housing in both home ownership, rental, and cooperative. In our community, we have one of the largest community centers, which is the Ray and Joan Kroc Community Center that's in the Northeast. And the heart of all this is the fact that the residents are the ones making these decisions. So when plans or housing developments are up, it's really the residents asking the questions, is that a good bedroom size? Does this really fit in our community? What color should these homes be? And again, it's the residents that are really empowered to make sure that these decisions are made. So my work spanned from being with the organization for about 25 years. I sat on the board of directors for 10 years, really helping with some of the policy work. And then I rolled up my sleeves and jumped in on staff for about 15 years, really moving these initiatives forward. And, Dudley Street is sort of held up as one of the models out there. But what it really boils down to is that you give residents the tools, the ability, and the resources, and they can actually really change the destiny of their own community. Ahmed, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm getting used to the platform. So I think, no, that's wonderful. And I think that really dovetails with, sort of what we've been speaking about in the conference since yesterday, which is really how to create political economies where folks have sort of control over their own neighborhoods and essentially their own economic futures, right? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mandy. Mandy, I was hoping you could discuss a little bit about what you've been working on at the South Florida CLT. I know I'm very excited to hear this. So please detail how you incorporate resident and community self-empowerment and engagement into your model. I think that dovetails very well with Jason's response, and a little bit about how we can expand CLTs in South Florida.
Great. Well, first off, thank you to Catalyst for having me. Thank you to Jason for sharing some of your early work in Boston area. I know that's really stands up as one of the best practices that we've seen. And thank you to everyone that's here today who's really rolling up their sleeve to try and solve some of the community's toughest challenges. So as Ahmed mentioned, I'm Mandy Bartle. I'm the Executive Director of the South Florida Community Land Trust, where we develop housing with really 3 guiding principles in mind. And first, it must provide a quality of life to the residents. Second, it must be sustainable into the future. And third, and probably above all, it must be affordable to the people currently living and working in the communities that we serve. And then in everything we do, we put it in a community land trust, which is really our way of protecting the land to keep things affordable forever. Now, before I answer your question, Ahmed, I just want to tell you why we do that, because I think that's really important. And it's because at the core, we believe that everything starts at home. Having a stable job, affordable, safe home, it's the key to accessing life's most precious opportunities, whether it's things like healthcare, a good education, a steady job, or prosperity. And really, that's really at the heart of what I think this summit's about. It's moving people from poverty to prosperity. And as the organizers kind of boldly stated at the beginning, it's starting to invest in communities of color through things like ownership. And there's some really great examples of community land trusts, including the first one, which was founded in Albany, Georgia, in an area that we know quite recently, in a state that we showed us the power of community organizing, the power of voting. But before that, they also showed us years ago the power of organizing and the fact that ownership and land is power. So I'm not going to go into detail, but certainly there are some great examples out there and some videos if you want to see more. But Ahmed, you asked me a little bit about empowerment and engagement. So I want to share with you the equitable plan that we came up with and introduce you to the housing link, which is a partnership that was formed between community land trusts and community development finance organizations, which are really kind of community lenders, to develop affordable, resilient, and sustainable communities along the transit corridor that unites South Florida. But first, I want to share just a quick story about the founding of the city of Miami, because I think it reveals a little bit about how the rail, race, and resiliency together have really shaped our neighborhoods here. So those that have studied South Florida's history have probably already heard of Julia Tuttle. She's the founder of the city of Miami. And I want to point out, she's the first and only female to have founded a major city in the United States. And Henry Flagler, who is the man that built the railroad. Now, their 2 fates were intertwined because Julia Tuttle gifted him land. And again, if we're talking about land is power, this shows the importance of it. She gave him 100 acres and she encouraged others in the community to do the same. And that's what Henry Flagler used to build his rail. And in turn, the rail brought enough people to found the city. Now, there's an untold part of the story that people don't usually mention, which is the story of the Black farmers and Black Bahamians that actually built the railway, and also provided the last 100 signatures needed for the city to officially found and incorporate. Now, once their work was completed, they settled on the western part of the tracks in an area known as Colortown, which we of course all know is Overtown today. And there was this trend of then white settlers coming in and moving east towards the beach. Now, fast forward to today, this corridor is still largely segregated, and we're seeing higher rates of poverty, crime, and other issues. And one of the key reasons is because few people could own their home on this corridor. So now, fast forward to today, this community that doesn't own their property is extremely vulnerable to gentrification. And we know a lot of these communities are the ones that are highly desired. Again, Overtown, Little Haiti, everything that runs along that FEC corridor. So we knew we needed to find a way to protect those residents and find a way to give them an opportunity to get out of poverty. But we first had to think about what would give them an opportunity. So here's where we get into our equitable planning. So we asked the partners in the community. It was a really short survey and a really short question, but it was one thing. We said, what would improve the lives of the residents that we serve? And the number one response we got was locate housing near transit. So that, of course, tied really nicely with the work and study that we've been doing along that railway. And there's been a lot of different transit studies happening on that corridor that you may have seen, and there's a lot of excitement going on. There's a lot of activity happening with the Brightline train and new transit stations going in. But not one of those studies, not one of those initiatives has mentioned the idea of equitable development. And now we of course know things are moving really quickly. Brightline went in just a couple years ago. They announced plans to go to Orlando. Now there's new stops coming to Miami. All that's happening seemingly overnight. And we want to make sure those people literally don't get left at the station and don't get pushed out. We want them to actually share in the improvements and the things happening in their neighborhood. So we came up with a plan, and not just any plan, but an equitable plan that took into consideration both the people and the climate. Because this corridor, as many may already know, happens to be some of the highest ground here in South Florida. So what that means is it's the least vulnerable to climate change. It's the least vulnerable to sea level rise. It's the least vulnerable to hurricanes and storms. And that is definitely the place we want to put some of the most vulnerable populations to protect them the most. So that's the exact place we should be locating affordable housing. Of course, we also know if opportunity means locating people close to transit, then this is where they need to be. So our plan is really simple. It's to build new units and improve old ones, to use resilient and sustainable building practices, materials, and technologies, and to hold the units in a community land trust, which of course means our nonprofit owns it, retains the land rights, and does that to provide and protect the affordability of the units forever. So I just want to mention the partners because I mentioned the Housing Link Initiative. We've got the Solar Energy Loan Funds. We've got the Florida Community Loan Fund, Enterprise Community Partners, the South Florida CLT, and the CLT of Palm Beach County, because this is a regional initiative. And I'm proud to announce that last year we were the recipient of the JP Morgan Chase Pro Neighborhoods Award. And that's what's going to provide us the capital we need to do those things in the community. So we've got ambitious goals. We're planning to ensure 300 permanently affordable units in that corridor. We're expecting it to attract $75 million worth of real estate investment to do that. And at the end of the day, we're going to build an affordable, resilient, sustainable community along that transit line.
That's a lot. What an answer. Thank you, Mandy. I loved hearing about that. And the next question is, it sort of like fits right in with some of the steps that you were mentioning, right? To be able to realize this project. And this question is actually for both Mandy and Jason. So it's, I was wondering if we could tell us a little bit more about. There's so many community groups, right, that are very, very interested in CLTs. And so, and there's so many like vibrant discussions, and I see it pretty frequently, right, with community members that we work with around like how, it's a CLT, what it could look like what it represents, right? But it's obviously a very complex project. And the next question I'm about to ask almost could take up like its own 3-day summit, right, in and of itself. But just, in a few minutes, at least at a high level overview, I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about how community groups acquire funds and land, right, or already developed property, and then either develop housing or rehab existing housing, and then, and sort of using the CLT model. How can groups find resources? How do they ensure community involvement is meaningful? These very kind of like difficult to tackle questions in just a few minutes. Obviously, no pressure, but yeah, I was hoping you could kind of speak to that a little bit.
Sure, and I don't mind kicking off. So I'm going to give an answer that's like real estate development, affordable real estate development, for dummies 101, which is when you think about developing affordable housing, the formula, if you're doing a pro forma, it can be complex, but it's really simple, right? It's the cost of land, it's the cost to build it, and then less whatever subsidies you find. That's the magic thing. So we've been working, and I'm going to see if I can share some of our projects, which may or may not happen. But we've been kind of using that model, and we've been working with Citibank and others to try and tackle each one of those. So we created an accelerator fund to try and acquire property early on. We've been looking and investing in innovative building systems, whether it's modular housing or 3D printing, and seeing if that can be a way to lower costs. And then, of course, we're working with the city and the county to get them to develop public policies that support community land trusts and others. So I'm going to let Jason add to that and see if I can pull up a couple examples of our projects to go into more details.
Thank you. The formula is very easy, and I would say that also some of the steps can be very easy, and that is around the fact of networking and really tapping into who you know and trying to get people excited about a certain vision. For my previous community at Dudley Street, we realized that creating that neighborhood plan was our visioning tool to go to like the Ford Foundation and get a $2 million project-related investment loan that gave us the ability to purchase all the land at once. It still gives us the ability to go to major funders and sort of say, hey, you want to buy into this vision. You want to get excited, but a lot of times folks don't really tap into the networking power that they actually have. Everyone knows somebody that's in a position that could possibly lead them to some decision-making tables where money is given out every single day. So for me, when I'm working with new startup groups, I really emphasize the fact that you want to get to know people's networks, you want to do some power mapping, and then you want to start figuring out what is the pitch? How do you get folks excited to come on? And then also, how do you make sure that as Mandy does projects and as other CLTs do projects, that you leave some space for some celebration, that you sort of throw as many parties as you can? Because everybody likes a good party. Everybody likes to feel good about what they're doing. And then that good feeling will mean that they may want to come back and reinvest in your projects. I think that that's one of the big successes of my work over the years is I've always said to startups, you should do a huge bash for your first unit. You should, celebrate, and not necessarily, you don't need to take the credit. Give everybody else the credit, because it's really giving those folks the credit that will mean that they'll be like, oh yeah, I want to be on that stage again, or I want to be cutting that ribbon, or, with that shovel. That is also playing into what sometimes people's vanity and egos are. And I'm more than happy to stroke those and be like, yeah, as long as you're going to write the check at the end of the day, hey, I'll play the game. But those have been some of the trends that I've seen.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that really hits on a one of what feels like two major sub themes of the conference, right? Which is organizing and working with community and community taking the lead, right? And really kind of like governing and taking ownership. I think there's something that, and Mandy mentioned this briefly during her answer, but another theme that's really kind of emerged throughout this conference is the role of the public sector. And so with that, and this came up quite a bit during that intro talk, but with that, I wanted to ask also both of you how communities and governments are starting to partner more intentionally to create CLTs. So for instance, Jason, I was hoping, whether you could speak to the city of Baltimore's commitment to create a dedicated stream of funding for CLTs for the first time. And Mandy, what are some of your thoughts about like how this could work in South Florida and what potential exists for public-private collaboration on CLTs?
So Jason, do you mind if I go first again? Together and of course, as a developer, we always want to showcase our projects, and of course, having a background in architecture, I can't help myself with some images. So this project, I think, showcases a couple things. So one of them was what Jason was mentioning before, is it really does take a village to build a village. This project, I want to say everybody helped assist and come together to make it affordable. So these lots were first donated by the city of Deerfield Beach, right? So that was where we started, was with local government. And it ended with Broward County providing the subsidies we need. And somewhere in between, we had folks that really made some early initial investments from different banks that were needed in the early capital and in the project. But this is community development. And one thing I want to point out is sometimes your projects can start small and have a big impact. This particular project was only 6 homes, and it was in a neighborhood that was an African-American community, a largely Bahamian community, and one that had been disinvested along that rail line for years. And I don't think there had been a home built in 15, 20 years. Once we built these, and you can see the vacant lot in this picture, after we built these, there's been at least 6 new homes started in the last 6 months on this street. And this is why you do it. I mean, this is Michael Hicks, and he was able to do what his father couldn't. He could own a home, right? And this is the family, and this is the celebration that Jason was talking about. So I don't want to take too long, but you're absolutely right, Ahmed. It starts with a partnership with the community, and it starts with a partnership with local government, taking some of the assets that they have and the land that they own and transforming it into something that's really impactful. So I'll let you keep going, Jason.
Yeah, no, and you're hitting on all the right points. In my 30 years of working with CLTs, I've not seen a community land trust that's been successful without having a partnership with their local government. And sometimes that can be hard. Sometimes because our local governments have abused us, have sort of, allowed for folks to come in and pillage our sort of communities and strip a lot of wealth. It's hard to go back and be like, oh yeah, well, let's partner now. I'm a big proponent of that. There needs to be some community healing. There also needs to be some truth telling with the local government. And it needs to start from there in terms of saying that you as a community are going to be what's called partnership ready to go into this relationship and re-engage with your local government. To the example of Baltimore. So the advocates in Baltimore really try to go down a road of, hey, we're going to try to get the city to voluntarily figure out how to come up with an affordable housing trust fund. We feel like it's a good tool. We think that, they can sort of do this. We're going to have these conversations. Well, as with sometimes government needs a kick in the butt. And that's what the advocates basically did. They basically organized a ballot initiative and ran a ballot initiative and got, I think, over like 70% to basically force the city of Baltimore to create an affordable housing trust fund that has a dedicated stream of funding that goes to community land trust. And they're doing it through stamp taxes on real estate transactions. And for this first year that they're actually giving out money, there's $7 million that is dedicated towards not just the subsidy, but also the soft cost that goes into development. And again, this $7 million is dedicated only to community land trust in the city of Baltimore. And currently right now, there are about 6 community land trusts that are collaboratively working together to really make sure that each of their projects are leveraged in a certain way that they can actually go ahead and actually have deep impact. Now, usually when the city is forced to do something, usually there's a lot of resistance. For the city of Baltimore, they've said, okay, we have our mandate. How can we actually, make sure that this is a successful project? And one of the things that they were, I think, humble enough in realizing is they don't know a lot about community land trust. They don't know how to look at these projects and be like, how is this affordability really going to be lasting? So luckily, they've actually have hired Grounded Solutions Network to come in as their technical assistance provider and really help them along this path. And this is something that we actually do throughout the country, where we're seeing more and more municipalities saying, we want to take this one-time public investment and put it into affordable housing and try to actually solve this crisis. I've worked in this field enough where I can go back to my city of Boston and actually have a stirring conversation with the policymakers and say, 30 years ago, you guys put some homes in deed restrictions that expired after 30 years. And for most of those communities are now being gentrified by the same homes that the city initially put in thinking 30 years was enough for a restriction. And I've said to them, how many units have you lost? And they would joke and be like, we don't lose houses. We always build affordable housing. In 1 year, they lost about 1,200 units. Because again, a lot of those restrictions started to end on expiring those uses. And a lot of those families basically stayed, and now they have basically a lottery ticket. They can go ahead and sell for whatever the market will bear. And in some of those communities, they bought a home for $90,000. They are actually selling those homes for $450,000. And again, that's great for that family. That family is able to, you know, receive a huge, as what I say, prize award. But what does it do to the community? It basically means that that community will no longer be affordable. And that's what this model really does, is it really says to folks, if we want to create affordable housing, why don't we keep it permanent? It's not like these folks are going to be locked into this permanent affordability, because we think, as what Mandy talked about, you have this stability, you're going to grow, and then one day you'll be able to move on to market rate homes. So these are just some of the things that I think more municipalities are starting to see some of these results after this model has been in operations now for about 50 years, that they're now starting to realize, oh, wait a minute, there are some positive results. And also importantly, hey, if we support this, we'll also get a win as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right, no, and thank you for that. And so I'm noticing it's almost 12:40, and I had one more question for you both, a pretty short one, before we take some of the questions that are coming up in the chat, which I think could actually bring up some pretty meaty issues. So just as a sort of like a note to folks who are, you know, in attendance, who are sort of very interested in community land trust, and this is a conversation that's really picking up a lot of steam in South Florida. What advice do you give to communities that are inspired by community land trust and don't know where to get started? And particularly during this moment, right? I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that we're still in the midst of a global pandemic, and the discussions and public debates over the housing crisis, both homeownership and an increasingly precarious state of being a tenant, right? If I didn't mention this, you know, we have to, right? So what would you want to say in just like a minute or two to communities that are interested in starting something like this up?
Well, I guess I'll keep starting. So, you know, certainly if you're looking to start up a new community land trust, the place to go is Grounded Solutions Network. They're the leader in this. They're the national experts. That's where you want to go. But I want to mention too, there might be an opportunity to partner. Maybe you don't have to do it all, right? So this is an example of our project right now in the heart of Miami, in the middle of Little Haiti. Isn't she lovely, right? But this property was owned by the Haitian American CDC. Certainly they're a tremendous organization, but they realized they could maybe do more if they partnered with us. So we actually acquired the land from them. They were able to use those funds for other things for the organization. And then we partnered with them to involve the neighborhood and the community to make sure that the project was not only designed with the community in mind, but it was actually designed by the community. So, you know, certainly if we were going to build something here and we wanted it to be the most affordable product, it would probably be something like what's in that right corner, just a big block, no window, you know, very small windows. But what we heard from neighborhood residents is they wanted to own their home, right? They wanted it to feel like Haiti and pay homage to the community. So we hired a local architect from the neighborhood. And actually she had done some work in Haiti after the earthquakes. And so she designed the project. And, you know, for those of you looking at this site, you might think New Orleans, but that's only because of the Creole influence in New Orleans. So the neighborhood residents actually named this Place Louverture to pay homage back home. And instead of designing a rental kind of box type of product, we designed townhomes. Because we heard from them, they wanted ownership. They wanted a little tiny piece of land. They wanted the balconies because they like to grow herbs, and sometimes the food they cooked was very pungent, and they wanted to open the windows from their kitchen. So the kitchens are right along the balconies, so you can open the windows. And this is the type of kind of collective partnership that we can do, where we know we can do more together, right? So I just want to mention that there may be an opportunity to partner with local groups rather than create your own. But certainly I want to give Jason a moment to share a little bit about Grounded Solutions, because they're the place to go if you do want to start a new CLT.
Thank you. Here at Grounded Solutions Network, we have built out an entire sort of how to start a community land trust hub. So it sort of builds in a pathway, because one of the things that we heard very, very quickly was, we don't know where we're going. You know, we're not sure how to manage this expectation of how to actually get one of these started, because it can be so complex and it can be so overwhelming. So we created sort of this visual pathway of, and really centered it around 6 major questions. And one of the major questions that we initially target is this idea of, who else is doing this in your area? Let's not recreate the wheel. If we can find partners that are willing to sort of come together and do things a little bit differently, then that is optimal. A lot of times when you're starting a new nonprofit, it can be very difficult to find that startup capital, not just for your first project, but just for operations. So why not try to work with an existing nonprofit and try to bring them along? So I always say that for folks that are interested in this, there are a number of different steps. One is to make sure that you get as much education about the model as possible. Yes, the model is 50 years old now, but it's still working up against a traditional market, you know, atmosphere and sort of a conditioning we all have around what does home ownership look like, you know. So that's something that, you know, even though the model's been around, it's been tested true, it's in 200 and something communities throughout the country, you'll still get a lot of skepticism about it. So finding out what this is all about will help you to make those partnerships last. And then lastly, I would say, and to underscore what Mandy said, if there is one in your area, trying to figure out how they are doing their decision making and how to make sure that they can leverage the fact that the community land trust starts with the community. We didn't create a model that says a housing land trust. We created a model that said community. So to Mandy's point of how they were able to go into a community and really say to that community, hey, we want to bring an architect in and they got great designs, but you need to know what you want in your own community and really drive that process.
No, that's exactly right. That was wow, what a note, especially, you know, when contemplating like what ownership looks like and what that means, right? That's actually my background with CLTs is also doing legal research on CLTs for a while. That's the question that comes up on so many levels. And ultimately that question in every example I've ever seen always lies with the community in terms of what ownership means, right? And what it could mean. So with that said, I'm really excited to read a couple of questions that folks have been posting in the chat. The first one is from Kenny. Hi, Kenny. Kenny asks, is community involvement just community input, or does it actually mean getting folks involved in terms of, for instance, obtaining some of the jobs necessary, needed to construct developments on the land? You know, what does involvement mean?
Mandy, keep going, starting.
Yes, so, I mean, really, we start with that, right? So one of kind of our values as an organization is that we must design with dignity in mind, right? And we must design for the community. So we start, the very first thing we do, just like you have an organization mission, we come up with a project mission, and we don't do that alone. We ask the community, what do they want to see? And that's really where the design comes from, and where the design grows out of. You know, and it's asking questions, you know, certainly it dictates, you know, it's not just color schemes, but, you know, ownership, rental, what are some of the needs of the neighborhood? And so that's where we start. And then when we're looking to bring on contractors, we need to hire a whole lot of people to build anything, right? And we know one of the biggest economic drivers in South Florida is real estate development. So we try and bring on architects and contractors that are from the neighborhood, or from at least the city, or from South Florida, from the community itself, right? So we're keeping that money invested in the neighborhood. We try and do things like even hiring, you know, local low-income residents where we can to be involved in the actual construction and learn some of those trades and design. But really, that's where you start, right? And it starts with that why, asking the neighborhood what they want to see, and how and why you're building that project to begin with.
Yeah, and to underscore that, to take it even one step further, one of the pieces of public policy that we've been pushing is, if there are, you know, NOFAs, notice of fund availability to fund some of these projects, that you actually put in local hiring as one of those additional scoring criteria. That as projects are coming in, and this is what the city of Baltimore did, is that they are actually giving groups that are making a commitment to local hiring of residents more points on their application than groups that are not. And again, it's one of those easy ways of saying that, no, we want to make sure that residents aren't just making the decisions, but if they have the skills and have the ability, that they're actually getting onto these projects as well.
Thank you for that. Our second question in the chat comes from Christian. Christian asks, considering the growing impacts of climate change, for instance, sea level rise and tidal and stormwater flooding, extreme heat, etc., and a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities, how can CLTs be used to mitigate impacts of displacement?
Yeah, no, and really that's the intent and the heart of our Housing Link initiative right now. So we're focused on that particular corridor along the FEC line. It is the highest ground here, but we're also just paying a very close attention to building sustainably and designing that into our projects as well. One of our targets was not only new development, but looking at older apartment buildings, and we targeted things built before Hurricane Andrew hit, which was before we had those really stringent hurricane codes. And that is one thing that we've actually started mapping throughout that corridor. And because what we know will happen, right, is those apartment buildings might be affordable now because they haven't been renovated yet. But once that owner puts in the money to renovate it, they're probably going to take a loan out, which means in turn, they're going to have to increase their rent, which means in turn, the people living there aren't going to be able to afford to stay. So we really see this all kind of tied together, this resiliency and affordability. And perhaps the CLT can come in and acquire it. We can renovate it, but we can do something a little bit differently that some of those private owners can't. We can get subsidies so that we can keep it affordable. And that's one of our key strategies in that initiative.
And for a few other CLTs throughout the country have really been able to take the leverage of natural disaster funds that are coming in to their communities, and really making sure that as those funds are coming in, they're actually offsetting other funds that were sort of set aside to do maybe some of those improvements. So like for the city of Houston, they've been able to take a lot of that natural disaster funds, put it to the communities where they wanted it to, which has freed up a lot of the additional funds in the budget to go into more permanent, affordable home ownership opportunities. Some of also the natural disaster funds, they've also realized that they can go ahead and invest this as a permanent subsidy for housing for the future. So for them, it's not like, oh yeah, we're just going to put this free federal money into these homes and not protect it. And that's something that we keep seeing throughout the country as what I think the new secretary or the new envoy of environment says, we're spending this money anyway. How can we actually make this money actually go a lot further? And some of it is in design, and others is in how do we make sure that these homes continue to stay affordable.
And a third question from the chat is from Melissa. Hi, Melissa. Melissa says, I'm so excited to learn all this great info on community land trusts. I'm particularly interested in how CLTs could work in collaboration with improving commercial corridors in low to medium income communities and lifting up business ownership as a means of economic mobility for residents.
So certainly, most community land trusts, the traditional ones, are known for home ownership, right? But people have used this model for a ton of different things, and certainly protecting the affordability of businesses could be one of those. And I know there's been some that are actually, that is their sole focus and their purpose. So it's not really the focus of our mission at the South Florida Community Land Trust, but we are currently looking at some larger developments that would be mixed use, have housing on the top, commercial on the bottom, and we would be looking to partner with CDFIs and others that could help businesses purchase space in those, and we would do a similar commitment that we make with our homeowners and our renters to keep the levels affordable and not make those year after year jumps. Jason, I don't know if you have any other really good examples from across the country to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually did a project in Dudley that was exactly what you described, Mandy, that mixed use. And we were not, as a community, we were, I think, less concerned about the affordability of the business space. Our community was really keen on what was going into those spaces. So our community, because we owned the land underneath, could actually dictate what actual uses of that commercial space is allowable and what is not. So we actually, as a community, came together and said, you know what? It's probably easier to tell folks what we don't want than what we do, because that's a longer list. But the ones that we don't want are like, we don't want a liquor store. We don't want a cash checker. We don't want a chiropractor. We don't want a rent-a-center. We don't want any of those businesses that are predominantly, their business model is to come into these low and moderate income communities and basically, take advantage of us. So as a community land trust, again, we were able to sit down with the community and say to them, we control and we can actually dictate what businesses come in and what businesses cannot. And that's something that is, again, one of those powerful tools that the CLT can provide to communities.
Thank you for that. And I also have to say that we will also explore some ideas for how to connect worker co-ops, for instance, and community land trusts and other community-owned and governed institutions during this process of institution building. We're going to chat a little bit about that tonight at 6. So that's actually pretty exciting as well, because there's just so much, right? So much work to do and so many opportunities for really connecting these community-controlled institution building efforts into ecosystems, right? Into new ways of thinking about economic development and local economies generally. Another question from the chat. So Lionel asks, are there any plans to create a network or coalition of qualitative CLTs within the 5 regions of the U.S.?
Which 5? I mean, we operate our national network of sort of members of Community Land Trust. I continue to praise Florida for their sort of network that they have statewide. And then also in a number of other, regional areas inside the US, you also have groups that are coming together and sort of leveraging that ability of sort of having some shared space, having some learning opportunities. I know that they have a network that's also in the state of California, where you basically have about 30 different community land trusts. So those groups actually come together and are able to push actually statewide legislation forward. So I would say that there's probably, if there isn't one, then I would reach out to those community land trusts and see if there's been conversations happening.
I think Mandy, I'm not sure. I think, oh, Mandy's back.
So there's been someone trying to get my attention for a while. He's delivering K95 masks for our residents, and I didn't realize that's why he's been trying to get in for the last 15 minutes. So just let him in.
Sounds good. Were you able to hear the question from Lionel in the audience about CLT networks?
Yeah, and the big one, as Jason mentioned, is Florida Housing Coalition does have the Florida CLT Institute. So that group, in addition to Grounded Solutions Network, are really kind of our key membership organizations and really at the forefront of providing the technical assistance that local CLTs need to be successful.
And we have another question that just came in through the chat. This is from Gretchen. Gretchen asked, if there's time, would you mind addressing how different CLT models address equity? And she says, by which I mean money and the ability for owners to build wealth.
So I can point towards a national study that Grounded Solutions just completed last year with our research partners at the Lincoln Land Institute for Land Policy that looked at community land trusts for the past 30 years and sort of asked that question, do these homeowners build wealth? And we were pleasantly surprised that on an average about $1,500 as a down payment within 6 to 7 years, homeowners were seeing a return of about $14,000. So for us, it sort of allowed us to say that, yes, there is the ability to build wealth within inside of this model. There is also the ability, I think, as what Mandy talked about initially, the big piece of being stable in housing allows you to financially look at and really leverage other wealth building opportunities out there. It's something that I'm a big proponent of is, yes, you go through your home buyer counseling session, but then at the same time, after you get in the home, you should go through money management courses because your finances have now changed. And you may have some more, what I like to call disposable income that you can actually put into more wealth building, higher risk, sort of bigger return, investment opportunities.
Yeah, and I would just add, community land trusts are a wealth building tool. And I'm going to say that one more time. Community land trusts are a wealth building tool. So certainly there is a shared appreciation, right? And that's what people focus on a lot of times. What don't I get compared to my neighbor? But we focus on the opposite, and we focus on what you do get. And the reality is a lot of the homeowners that we help and assist, this is their only pathway towards homeownership. And what we found is they're actually paying less to be a CLT homeowner than they were paying in rent. So in addition to that equity buildup that they are building in their home, everything from paying down their principal to a portion of the appreciation in the market, they're actually saving money each month. And I don't know about you, but I would much rather have money in my pocket than wealth accruing in my home. Because those are the dollars that make a difference in your life, right? You can now buy the medicine you need. You can now send your kids to the school that you want to send them to. That's what really counts. And on average, I want to say our homeowners are saving about $6,000 a year from what they were paying in rent alone. So I just am going to end with the same thing I started with. CLTs are a wealth building tool, and do not let anyone tell you otherwise.
Well, all right. So this was, I have to say, as we wrap up, that this was an honor. I really admire South Florida CLT's work and have been from a distance for a while, and of course, Grounded Solutions. So it's really incredible to have been able to moderate this panel. So with that, I really want to thank you both, Mandy and Jason, for being a part of this, for answering questions so thoughtfully with so much depth, and for the work that you do. And the work that you do with communities. With that, I also want to remind folks that are in attendance today to please join a breakout session that we're having tomorrow for community-controlled initiatives. It's tomorrow at 1 p.m., where we're going to discuss ways to get involved with not only with Community Land Trust, but with the other community-controlled initiatives we've been discussing over the last 2 days. That includes public banking, that includes worker co-ops. So please come on out tomorrow at 1 p.m. And I guess you'll see me there again as well. But thank you again so much, Mandy and Jason.
Thank you. And I just added my contact information in case anyone wants to reach out to me. And that is a D in my email address, Mandy. Thank you.